Hey, DM Battlegrid here. I'm going to be doing a short series of videos on how I create and use battle maps for RPG crossings. It's a question I get asked at least a couple times a year, and I've done a write-up on it I'm not completely happy with, and some of my process has changed. So I just wanted to go through actually showing what I do. The software I use is paint.net. It's free to use. There are a ton of plugins to add in all kinds of effects that make it very powerful. I've been using it for years, so I'm comfortable with it, so that's my software of choice. But the steps I'm going to use, you can use with all kinds of software. You can do it with GIMP, you can do it with Photoshop, and so forth. This is just my tool of choice here. So the first thing we're going to do is create a grid overlay. And in play by post, oftentimes characters are going to indicate where they are by XY type coordinates. So we're going to label one of the axes with numbers and the other with letters. When we're playing at the table or if we're doing Roll20, you don't need the numbering set out for your players because they can physically see where they're at all times. But in play-by-post, that numbering system is important. So we start with a new image, and I like to make my squares, 5-foot squares for most of my maps, and I like it to be 100 pixels by 100 pixels per square. You can do smaller than that. For example, if you're going to upload it to Roll20, I think 70 by 70 is the default. I like to use 100. Just because it keeps everything easy later on figuring out spacing. So if I did an image by 100 by 100, that would give me one 5 by 5 square. We're going to make a default template here that's going to be 20 squares by 20 squares. Now, because we need an extra one here for the numbering, I need the total width and height to be 2100 pixels. So we'll set that. And here's my new image. Now, I don't actually need the background layer, so I'm just going to uncheck that and leave that as the alpha channel, and that's going to be important later on because this is going to be a grid overlay I can put on some kind of other map. Create a new layer. We're going to call this one grid, and the first thing we're going to do is just come in here and actually render our grid lines. I have a lot of plugins in here that don't come with the default installation. You can get these through the forums. I've had so many over the years I don't even remember where all they came from. We've got two different grid plugins. Both of them work. I'm just going to grab the first one here, and we're just going to set the grid size to 100. Line width 1 is fine. We can go thicker than that if we want. I'm going to leave it at 1 for now. Sometimes I'll add shading on my grids to make them a little more well-defined. But here's where we're going to start. So we got a basic grid out here. What I'm going to do is add some white bars to base my numbering and lettering on. So I'm going to add another layer here. I'm going to call this labels. And I'm going to create a line that's 100 pixels wide since that's one of my squares. And I'm going to want this to be white. So first I'm just going to create a line, put it across there so I don't have to manually try to line it up. I'm going to use the line objects function and just put this right up at the top of the map. And I'm going to create another one of these for the left side. And again, just align that to the left. And then merge those down. Now for my text, pretty much all text that I use on all my maps, I use Casteller text for a couple reasons. It's thick, it's easy to see, and it's one of the ones I see in my list from the default font it picks, so I don't have to go scrolling through trying to remember what I was using. And here we're going to start using our numbering and letters. So start with size 48. We'll see what that looks like. Make sure my color is black here. Make it bold. It looks like it'll probably fit well enough. So I grab my A, grab my B. Sometimes I put the numbers on the top, sometimes I put the numbers on the left side. I'm never real consistent in how I do that. I notice right now these are not centered very well, and that's alright. There are some advanced text plugins you can use to manually set your spacing and so forth for all of your numbers. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to do it manually, and I'll show you how to align this here once I get these in. Mostly I just need them to be in the proper square. Alright, let's make sure I got all my letters in here. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, P, Q, R, S, T. Nothing's worse than having a letter or a number in here twice and not realizing it until after you've got a finished map. So double checking your work is always good. And we're going to put our numbers on the left side. Just kind of clicking elsewhere in the map to put the number initially so that it doesn't confusedly add it into the same text field. And then I'll move it over to the block where I need it. And 20. Alright, Control D to finalize all your text or anything you're putting it in. Now in the past, there was a quick way to align all these. I'm just going to grab the magic wand tool and on my grid layer, select my grid squares. I could just come and select all of these at once and then go Effects, Align. So let me change back to where the letters are actually at. Align objects and center them. A couple revisions ago, Paint.net, this would evaluate the center when I hit center for aligning the object of each selected section individually. It doesn't do that anymore. So I've got to select each grid square one at a time, align object to the center, back to the grid, and repeat this process for every square. If I did a little more work to use one of the fancy text plugins up front, I might have had a little bit less work here getting these lined up. This is kind of the manual, slow way to do this. Alright, I've got all my numbers and letters nicely aligned. And frankly, this could be good enough. I made a couple things to make this just a little bit niftier. First we're going to duplicate this grid layer. And we'll call this grid texture. And what I'm going to do is add a little bit of shading into each of these squares. Let's can use our outline object. I've got two of these plugins for this, picked up just over the years. They do various different functions. And what I want to do is just add a little bit of shading around the square, around the grid lines. About like that. And that'll make it show up a little bit nicer when I've got some kind of background where the lines are actually at. I don't want those where my numberings are at, so I'm going to come down here to the labels layer where I have just my white bars and just delete those off the grid texture. Now, the next thing I want to do is make the labels a little bit fancier. The white is fine, but it can be kind of jarring to look at a little bit. Just have more texture here. So what I'm going to do is add some coloring in here on the labels. So I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to do a rectangle or a triangle here off one of these letters. So let's just get a triangle out here. And I'm not really liking that one. Let's undo that. flip this around. Alright, my triangle's going crazy on me here. Here we go. I'm going to select everything but it, and then grab my moving sizing tool so we get this the size I want. And I left that annoying outline there. I'm going to hit Control-I to invert my selection. Delete that, and then work with just this part of it. Still got a bit of an outline there. We'll take care of that in a minute here. I'm going to make this a little bit thinner. And now that I've kind of moved this around with the mouse, I'm going to use the arrow keys. And I want to line up the point of this triangle so it's right on the grid line. And then I'm going to position it to where it kind of lines up with the bottom of my label field. Now if I go a little bit past it where the grid's at, that's fine. I can select all the area that's actually in the grid easily from my labels layer and just delete that later. But I'm going to put it right about there. And let's delete those shadows I got left. Then what I'm going to do is grab my selection tool and just grab this square and start placing them on every grid line. And once I got about 3 of them, I'll recopy the group. Now I could duplicate this layer and move the layer over as well. That works. I'll use that method sometimes. I got 6. Let's grab all 6. So every time I do this, I'm just cutting my work in half. And there are paneling plugins you can get to move layers over by specific amounts of pixels and things, which could speed this process up. Alright, I went too far. So if I did the duplicate the layer thing, I just click here and then go the same process. And this should give me enough to complete this row. And merge that down. The one thing I didn't do, I didn't get the partial triangle here on the A. I want to do that. But I'm going to do that here after I get these numbers on the other side. So to get the left side now, I'm just going to duplicate this layer. And I'm just going to rotate this layer. Actually, I think I can do it from here. It'll be easier. Now that rotated my whole image. Alright, let's rotate that one 90 degrees. Kind of what I wanted, not completely. So I'm going to just duplicate that, move this layer down some, to make sure I've got my edging on the numbering all the way through 20. Alright, now I want to get the triangle in here off the other side of A. So I'm going to grab one and copy it from my texture layer. And I'm going to paste this onto a different layer just because the whole area I copy and paste, even if it's the alpha channel, that will kind of write over anything you previously had. I can merge that down. So for example, if I left it like this, when I start moving it, you'll notice it hides what's underneath it anywhere around the box you'd selected. So that's why I put that on a different layer, just to paste it down. Alright, I've got my texture blocks out here. Now I want to add a little bit of a fading effect on these. So I'm going to come back again and use that outline object that we've done on the grid. And those settings look alright. I could make it a little bit bigger if I wanted to. Go about there. I'm going to come delete everything that goes into the grid space. So I select that, come back to my texture layer, just delete it. Now the top left corner here I actually want to have be all black. So on the grid I'm going to select that square, paste it black, and merge it down. Alright, here we have our basic template we're going to use. I'm going to go ahead and save this. And I'm going to save this as, make a new folder here, map tuts. I'll save the paint.net version of this. Sometimes you still want these broken out, but really I can just save this as a PNG file here. Final maps you're going to want to save in JPEG. It's going to compress better, but PNG works for this kind of thing where you need to preserve the alpha channel. Another thing you'll notice that will do is it's going to completely flatten the map. So now if I want to use this grid for any kind of a map that I want to make, I just open up this file and then I can start adding in my layers underneath it and populating things. So that's a way to make a grid template. Lots of things you can adjust on here. If you don't like quite the way it looks, you can make your edging smaller, you can adjust the letter size, you could put a bit of a colored outline around the numbering, that kind of thing. That's a basic start.